So we have 41 alumni who have graduated from La Paz over the last 5 years. And I just sent out an alumni survey. I wanted to ask that question because we want to know, like, well, what is it? Because I got kids who are at Les Sorbonne in France, one of the top universities in France. I have kids who, a kid who's doing aeronautical engineering studies in Southern California. I have a kid who's being a ski bum in the French Alps right now. I mean, they're all over the place. They're all over the map. There was all kinds of, little pieces that we can pull from those alumni surveys, but the overarching theme was basically that La Paz empowered them and gave them the skills to do whatever they wanted and didn't tell them what they had to do, right? They're just like, okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to figure out. Even if I don't have any money, I'm going to go, be a ski bum for a while. And then from there, they're going to do something else. They're going to do something else. And ultimately, we have faith. We know that they're going to find their niche. And it's so fun to see these kids start falling into their niche. They're exploring for 4 or 5 years. Some went right into university because they were super academically driven and university was their calling.
Yeah.
But others didn't know their calling. And they just needed to experience the world. So we want to give them as many keys as possible to open as many doors as possible whenever they want, however they want.
Right.
And that is true empowerment.
This is episode 57 of the Ownstream Podcast, featuring Abel McClennen.
Welcome to the Ownstream Podcast. I'm Teresa Scova.
And I'm Stephen Shelley.
And we're so excited to release this interview with Abel McClennen. And Stephen's going to do most of the talking here because he actually did the interview. We're still in Costa Rica and we're without childcare, so splitting up these interviews. But I wanted to say at the beginning, we've been in correspondence with Abel for quite a while because we had heard about the La Paz Community School where he's the director and was one of the founders for quite a while from our friend Phil, who, he and his family moved here so that their son could attend the school, in large part among other reasons. But it's that special of a place, which Stephen will get into. But we got an opportunity to visit the school upon the beginning of our trip to Costa Rica because we were in the Brasilito area when we first started our trip a couple months ago, and had an opportunity to be there. We went for the school farmers market because there's one day a week where they do a farmers market, and it was so fantastic being there. They grow produce there among many other things that the kids do in terms of their experiential education, and so we got a chance to be there, and Sophia ran around, and you just get a really strong feeling at the school that the kids are having a good time and thriving and excited to be there. I'll let Stephen do the rest of the talking here.
Yeah, there's the word that came to mind in the conversation with Abel was just a lightness to the place, whereas so many of I think we both share this, our educational experiences, and very public school for me, a wonderful school in the mountains of North Carolina, but there was a heaviness to it, academia, the rigor, and the pressure and the stress that most students kind of experience in their high school years. I remember, and you and I talked about this a lot, but there's a point, I think any graduate through the Western system, or at least the system in the U.S., realizes that, oh my gosh, this is stressful. Like the first feelings of stress and anxiety I had was at school.
Yeah, I always talk about to Stephen, and we've been reflecting on it after this interview, that the day I started private school after being in Montessori, and I was in 5th grade, and I remember having textbooks for the first time. And I'm 10 years old, and I'm emerging from private school. My mom remembers the moment really vividly, that I had this massive load on my back of books. And that's my journals at the time say it, I felt so much stress from being 10 years old, and it just carried forward.
Yeah, you don't have that feeling at La Paz, though. I'm sure that there is, there are boundaries. There is a curriculum per se. It's not not without responsibility and some facets of a traditional education, but the overarching energy of the place is not that of the usual school. And Abel and a handful of his friends, about a dozen years ago or so, I think it was 11 actually, at the time of this recording, which is the spring of 2018. I think there were 6 total, and we have a photograph that we'll feature in the show notes of all the founders. Kind of concocted this idea of a school in a part of Costa Rica, which is there's a natural blend occurring of local Tico families and people and expats, people moving here from around the world. And they had this vision of a school that kind of included everybody, and that could prepare people for life after school, prepare young people for life after school without much of the rigor. That's the word that keeps coming to mind, and the strain and the force that seems to be so prevalent in Western schools. And you feel it when you're there. Like when we went to that farmer's market, you could feel it. Like people were so happy, and it was the end of the day, and the kids and the parents and the staff are all involved in the farmer's market. So there's no feeling of it being one part of the school doing this. Everybody's kind of doing it, and they're working together. And that is as you'll hear in this interview, Abel talks about various ways that these kind of lines are blurred purposefully so that everybody feels like they're a whole. There's not like a class structure imposed as you would find in normal schools where there's a professor and then there's all the students. There are teachers, and that's the case, but there's plenty of ways for them to blend and connect and form community together that I would imagine, and you could feel it there, supports a blooming environment. And as you've just heard in that quote, the aim is not necessarily to send people off to college, though that clearly happens, because as he says, some kids really want that. But the aim is really to get them to a place where they feel ready. There's a readiness to encounter what's next, and the support is in place for what's next to be whatever the kid wants, which is so beautiful. So this interview is really about kind of another model of education that is forming at La Paz, and you see there's a handful of other schools around the world that are really blending nature and blending cultures in a school where there tend to be a lot of expats, people who have traveled and moved to this particular location, and as well local people as well. There's a really good one in near Ubud, Bali, for example, that we talked about a little bit. Abel and I did, not during the interview, but prior to. And there are more than that. I don't mean to single those out, but there are other ones, and it's a great opportunity when you bring all these cultures together to kind of reface the question. Okay, how do you educate? What is that? Because everybody's coming with their own background. Not everybody's an American student like you and I were, and kind of contending with those categories of different subjects and books and homework and that whole process. So you can tell that they really faced that question, the founders of La Paz, with quite a spirit of inclusivity and involving nature and the natural rhythms of this world here in Costa Rica. And community, and really kind of wanting people to connect separate from maybe the traditional structures of where you're from, your class, your social status. All those things are kind of are not thrown out the window, but they're not highlighted, they're not featured, they're not overly important in this case. But walking around the school with Abel, what you notice right away is how personable he is. He's so warm, and you're going to hear it in this conversation. He magnetizes people to him because he's so bright. He just shines so brightly. And the kids and the parents, we walked around campus. It took us about 45 minutes, and he probably interacted with 20 different people. He knew all their names. They, of course, knew he was. And there was a very sincere connection between him and every child and parent. You can tell that he really values knowing his students and their parents, and everybody feels a part of the family at La Paz. But this is also not only a story about kind of another how this wonderful group of people is creating a different model for education. And many people are hungry for La Paz schools to pop up in their locations. He'll talk about that a little bit. But it's really also in keeping with the Ownstream tradition. This is a conversation about a man who knows his calling and who's expressing that on a daily basis. And you can hear the joy oozing through him throughout this whole conversation. I mean, he is so alive in that element. That's what I noticed right away. Like, here is a man who is on his compass. He knows what he's doing, and he's doing it very, very beautifully well. We did this interview right in a conference room, kind of in the midst of the admin offices. So there were people milling about. You'll hear students, you'll hear parents, you'll hear faculty. Abel's wife was right across the hall during this. They worked together at the school, and boy, the energy in this conversation, if you can just feel into the warmth and openness of Abel, that's carries through the whole experience at La Paz, and it's truly a special place. So there's multi-levels to this conversation. I hope you can access those. This is not only about a new way to help young people grow into being ready for what's to come on this planet, but it's really also, as important, a story of a guy who's doing what he loves, and that's beautiful.
Oh, I'm so excited. Another great thing about this, the focus of this conversation, is that we've highlighted different ways of educating young people on the podcast in a number of ways, but focused mostly on very alternative to the traditional structured school. Like, we've talked about world schooling on a few podcasts, and unschooling, more kind of homeschool varieties. And so it's great to be able to feature a school that's doing something so differently and, has similar aims, I think, to those approaches. So anyway, super excited about this. Before we let you listen to this interview, I'll just say that, we'd love it if you enjoy this episode, if you're enjoying the podcast, to leave us a review on iTunes. Really will help us expand our reach, have more people see the podcast, and for us to reach more people. Stephen has another thing to say.
Yeah, at the end of this, when we ask the traditional question about books, Abel couldn't remember the name of one of the books. The book that he's referring to in that moment, the second book on his list, is called Nurture Shock. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. That'll be at ownstream.co/ Abel McClennen. That's ABELMCCLENNEN. So that book is Nurture Shock. We'll link to that in the show notes. Okay, enough of us. We'll be back afterwards for a quick wrap up. Until then, please enjoy our conversation with Abel McClennen.
Growing up in suburban Holliston, Massachusetts, very much working middle class town of monocultural beings. You're in a bubble. Yeah. And then I went from Holliston. I just took the road that the goal-oriented, trophy-oriented world directed me to. I was pretty driven. I had 3 older brothers, and they all went to the NESCAC small Ivy schools up there. The Williams, Bowdoin, Middlebury type. Right. So I followed their path because that was what you did if you were driven and goal oriented. And so I went to Bowdoin and played sports there and studied there, and that's still very much in a bubble. Yeah. And had a wonderful college experience, but in terms of mind opening, maybe not so much. Yeah. Because it was again a pretty monocultural environment, not so heterogeneous in many ways. I think those schools are getting better at being more inclusive, but it's still a challenge. There's still a certain elitism about those kinds of places. But no, it definitely helped create who I am today. I have no regrets. Probably would have taken a gap year. That would have been much more valuable to me. I think my 4 years of university would have been better spent after a gap year. Yeah. But from there, so I was a physics major there and took some classes in education, and definitely became very excited about education because I was a sociology minor and a physics major, which is kind of a unique combination. It's kind of the left brain, right brain piece there. And I just loved interacting with kids. I loved coaching, and I found that I loved teaching. But I didn't have enough to get my teacher certificate. So from Bowdoin, I'll always remember that day. My dad, who was an educator his whole life and ended up moving through principal positions up through assistant superintendent positions outside Boston. My mom was also a teacher as well. I never thought I'd be a teacher. And my dad sent me I remember he sent this little clipping from the Boston Globe that said, Sauhegan High School, unique progressive school in public school in Southern New Hampshire, seeking physics educator. Because he knew I was looking for a teaching job, but I didn't have a certificate. He's like, Abel, apply to this school. And I had been sending applications all over the place, but no one was giving me the time of day because I had no teaching certificate. And sure enough, I applied to the school. This is all via like snail mail back in the day,
Yeah.
And they called the interview. I remember going to like Brooks Brothers to get my first suit and everything, and show up at this school.
Yeah. You went for it there at the Brooks Brothers.
Oh yeah, I was like, because I was at Bowdoin, right? Like that's what all the guys did there. All my buddies were going into New York City and interviewing at the financial firms and things, and they're like, you got it. That's where you go. That's what you do. There's your paradigm, right there.
Yeah.
So I went to the interview, and everybody was looking at me like I was crazy with my suit on, because this is a progressive public school started by a bunch of, somewhat kind of ex-hippies who were very much, maybe not into the Brooks Brothers suits. They made, years later, after working there for a while, they made sure to make fun of me about that. You showed up with a, brand new suit. Anyway, got the job there. Taught physics for 3 years there. Met my wife, Carrie. And so this was a super progressive public school that had branched off of another regional school, which was getting too big in Amherst, New Hampshire. And we got there in year 7. They were kind of going through their growing pains, and we were working to help figure it out. It was a phenomenal experience. Amherst, New Hampshire is stunning, beautiful. Kind of a bedroom community for Boston and so on. But so we saw basically this, white picket fence, beautiful home, 2.3 children, like on the horizon. And we were 23, 24 years old. We had some years of teaching under our belt in a phenomenal school. And it was too perfect. It was too Truman Show. It was awesome. We had great friends, everything. I mean, it was quite monocultural. Again, it was quite homogeneous, but we didn't. There was an itch. So we basically got married, put away all the stuff that we got from our wedding into our my parents' barn. I grew up on a farm outside Boston, and put on our backpacks, said goodbye to all of our friends and family, and left. And we went to
So let's bookmark this moment.
Okay.
This is very interesting. Let me clearly from here, a very new kind of path and experiences began to emerge, because you're describing what is very similar to my upbringing too. Classic education, went to a big school. I mean, your school where you went, obviously much smaller than the big state school I went to, but it was still very much everybody went there.
Yeah.
This is sort of everybody goes to UNC Chapel Hill.
Yeah.
I'm interested, both your parents are educators. Mm-hmm. Obviously had a very strong relationship to you. But when you were coming up, even as a young boy, so like, just so listeners know, we've spent about almost an hour together. You've walked me around campus, and I've observed like what seems to me to be like a very personable, warm, welcoming, but a leader, somebody who's clearly like very comfortable as a leader. Like like leadership qualities aren't like like it's you're very welcoming, you're very generous. There's clearly like an affinity for you by the people here. We're walking around Paz School, but I'm wondering, as you came up, like, were there early signs of being a leader, being somebody interested in teaching? Teaching to me is sort of like just this such a generous action. Mm-hmm. Were there early stories or early cases of you just kind of naturally adopting those roles, or did that come later?
Yeah, I mean, I think to a certain extent, leadership was in the blood of our family. You know, I have three older brothers, and they're all, in very high-profile jobs in different walks of their professional lives in the States. One's a high-profile electrophysiologist outside Boston. Wow. The other was the director of a startup school out in Jackson, Wyoming. And now he's in charge of innovation there. So his only job is to create new ideas and implement them for that school. It's based out of the Teton Science schools. And then my other brother is in Brooklyn, New York, and he is in the Wildlife Conservation Society. They run basically all the Brooklyn zoos, but they also do have a international conservation program, and he's the head of the marine portion of that. So he travels all around the world and supervises hundreds of scientists and does all kinds of crazy stuff. Yeah. Now they're doing out on the Brooklyn. They're doing the New York Aquarium. They're renovating it, and he's involved in that project. Yeah. So he's
took a major hit during Hurricane Sandy.
Yeah. So they're redoing it. So we were just there actually this last vacation. Oh, nice. Phenomenal. So yes, I mean it was in our blood. I don't know. I think every time one has a child, you're rolling the dice. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what kind of natural factors are going to influence them. You don't know how their brain's going to be wired. And I think there was a phenomenal combination of nature versus nurture that we were really fortunate to grow up on. My parents rolled the dice. They got a good roll. And on the top of that, they were really good parents. They taught us to be super independent. I had a paper route at a really young age. They let me run and let all of us run. And I owe everything to them.
Yeah.
So. And my brothers were pushing me. My brothers were, they were like the captains of all their teams and blah, blah, blah. So I had to be that as well. Right. And I was the younger one, so I had to, run to keep up with them. And it was magical. So one moment that I really remember where I really felt like, okay, like I love education. I love this. It was when I was in the National Honor Society in high school. I had this teacher, Mr. Kerboy. He was a character, and he was the head of the National Honor Society, and he introduced me to the world of Special Olympics and the world of special education and, students with Down syndrome. There was a whole sub-school within our high school to help students with high learning needs and or higher order learning needs. And so basically, we put together this Special Olympics program where they'd come in every weekend and we teach them tennis, because tennis was like my sport. Tennis, really? Tennis and soccer and basketball is what I did in high school. But it was putting my passion of tennis into a teaching mode, and we do it in our local gym every Saturday, and I had to recruit a bunch of other kids from the school to help teach these students kids who were interested in Special Olympics, teach them how to play tennis. And that stuck with me forever. Like it was just such a profound experience. It was so fulfilling, and so I wish I could say that it was altruistic, but what I got out of it was equally it set me up, I think, for that feeling of fulfillment of doing something that is just for the good of humanity was ingrained in me. And my parents, listen, they grew up, they did the Peace Corps. They came from kind of somewhat high society, New England world, old money, and they rejected that after college. My dad went to Harvard, my mom went to Mount Holyoke, because that's what you did when you were in that world. Right. And then they, so then they they kind of rejected that. Went away to Brazil to the Peace Corps and explored the world a bit. Then came back and were in education. Yeah. My mom, before education, she's also a knitter and a spinner. And she's like,
spinner.
Yeah, so we have spinning wheels all over our house. So I grew up with that world as well. Knitting, yeah. So
more portable, easy, but spinning is way serious.
Right. So we had sheep and chickens on our farm. So we'd shear the sheep, and then the wool you'd use that to spin, and then she'd use the spun wool to make sweaters and mittens, and we all grew up with those and so on. Yeah, I was the sheep boy, and as my friends would always make fun of me for sure, because we were pretty much the only ones in town who had sheep, and that was cool.
Yeah. The influence of nature, it sounds like, is a very clear theme for you, describing growing up on a farm. Yeah. This was a livestock farm, or was it a
No, I mean,
dairy?
It was a 3-acre farm, but we had sheep and chickens. So
wow.
So the chickens we'd use just for the chickens were for laying eggs, and then when they got old enough, we'd bring them to Blood's farm outside Boston, I think in Shrewsbury. I remember those trips, and bring them and they'd slaughter them. And actually, we were first, because the Blood family was the old New England family who were the slaughter. They were the family to go to for slaughtering at the Blood. Yeah, wow. Right? Isn't that crazy? Ooh. And so I think in the beginning we would slaughter our own chickens and do that whole process, but the sheep we bring up there. And I always remember that feeling of walking into just the lobby and see. There was always a clear glass window looking into the slaughterhouse, and you just see these animals hanging up. Oh, and that desensitized me to that really quickly. Yeah, okay, that's what we do. So we wait for the sheep to get really old, like they had names and everything, and they get really old, and then we'd slaughter them. So really desensitized. And then we were like, okay, we're eating Patsy here.
That's interesting.
So that we'd have mutton is what it was. It wasn't like
But I imagine there's a real appreciation for food and the life cycles and all of that that many of us are very divorced from in the Western world. We don't know where our food comes from. We don't appreciate what it takes to raise a chicken. Like, this is all happening so far away from us.
Yeah.
But you were right there in the middle of it, learning directly from nature. And one thing that's very clear in this model that you've created here at La Paz that we'll get into is that there's a appreciation of natural movement versus kind of highly imposed, very extremely strict, rigid structures. I think that's a big generalization, but
yeah.
I'm wondering, like, the influence of nature on your early life, I imagine, is something that's been very, very impactful for you.
I mean, absolutely. My parents were taking us out. We were hiking and bringing our tents up to the White Mountains before it was like total chaos with the amount of summer folks. I remember, climbing up Mount Monadnock, heading up to the White Mountains, driving over to the Catskills. When I was 8 years old, we got in our family van and drove across the country and visited all the national parks.
What kind of van?
It was a Ford Econoline.
So listeners know that my wife and I have traveled in the last 7 months in a Sprinter van that we converted into a camper.
Yeah, no, ours was definitely not that. So my parents put my dad built a wooden bed to go in the back of this, basic Ford Econoline van. That was just the way we were. So it certainly wasn't designed for long trips like that. It had bench seating. So we bring our tents and just kind of go and get out into nature and explore. Our backyard, the 3 acres was somewhat small, or 3.5 acres, whatever. It was, trees and forest outside of the farm. So we were always we were in the woods playing. We'd build forts and tree houses in the pine trees in the backwoods and just, my parents were just like, go explore. Yeah. So I think that was ingrained in us from a very young age, and they did it themselves. They showed us the way. Yeah. So, like I said, the nature versus nurture, it was a perfect combination. So I feel like so fortunate, and sometimes, I feel there's a privilege, and the privilege carries a responsibility, and sometimes it's just like, wow, I met my wife and learned about her family, met her family, and they equally roll the dice and we're equally loving, and sometimes it just doesn't work out.
Right.
And that's what you learn through education. These kids, the combination of nature and nurture is so powerful, and it's very rare that I'll just be honest, it's very rare that it works out the way that it worked out for me and my brothers and my family. And I feel, like I want to do everything possible to help educate all the different rolls of the dice and all the different familiar choices that people make, to give them a bit of what I was fortunate to experience as a child.
So the experience of the educator excitement, or the feeling of helping others in that way, began through athletics and through teaching tennis. And where did that go from there? Did you begin imagining, like, okay, I'm going to be a teacher, I'm going to be a professor? Where does that flow from that point?
No, I definitely didn't imagine or think about being a teacher or professor. I think I wanted to be a professional soccer player all the way through college. Like, even after college, I was like, I'm going to be, like, even when I was teaching, I'm like, I could still maybe be a professional. I don't know. I had that like just deep rooted dream. I'd spend my summers on Cape Cod and play soccer there. I spent my summers on Cape Cod with my grandparents who lived there. Nice. That really helped form who I am today. Learned how to sail at a very young age, and sailing is just another one of those beautifully organic experiences where failure has consequences that you must learn from. And one of the concepts at the school of growth mindset and learning how to fail better is you also see that here. Sailing is just a perfect example of that. So maybe I digressed a little bit there. Then at Bowdoin College, I was lost, definitely partying, probably too much, having a blast. Met my friends for life there. On the soccer team, on the squash team, I learned how to play squash instead of playing tennis. That was funny. The tennis coach was like, hey, learn how to play squash to work on your hand skills. I'm like, okay. So I started playing squash. I fell in love with it. And I never picked up a tennis racket for 10 years after that. Anyway, so, it wasn't until maybe my junior year in college where I'm like, well, physics teachers, I learned that there was a need for physics teachers. And that's when my junior year I started taking education courses. So that's where it finally clicked. And then senior year was when my dad sent me that clipping to go for Sauhegan Public High School. Right? It's crazy.
Well, let me. So we're at the point where you're about to take this trip. You've met your wife. Maybe you should tell us how you met her, because she's very much a part of your life here, obviously at the school. Yeah. But I also you said something earlier about a gap year, about the value of a gap year, how you wish you had taken a gap year. And I'm wondering maybe if your trip after with your wife was sort of expressing something from that longing to travel and see things and experience things past the kind of confines of New England.
I think... Yes, I mean there was something in me that was yearning to explore. I mean, my junior year in college, I spent half a year on a boat sailing across the Atlantic. We sailed from the Caribbean up through Bermuda, up to Nova Scotia, Lunenburg, sailed into Boston Harbor, then went through the Cape Cod Canal. That was just like such an emotional experience, going through the canal when I had traveled over it my whole life on the way to the summer, and for the first time in my life I got to go underneath the bridges there. And so that experience also just further fed this desire to explore, for sure. I was doing it as part of a program called Sea Semester, which gave you college credit. We did some, marine research and SEA education out of Woods Hole. Phenomenal program that helped really shaped who I am today as well. When you're out on a boat for a while. Yeah. I remember writing poems while I was on night watch. Right. Because you had to be on night watch to make sure you didn't run into any freighter ships or freight that had fallen off of freighter ships. Oh, wow. Or any kind of flotsam and jetsam. So you're out there alone in the middle of the night, you start seeing things. And I'm like getting all deep and idealistic as a junior in college. Yeah. So yes, all those things fed whether it was sailing, whether it was, not taking the gap year, but then doing the junior year abroad. And that brings me to Carrie. Yeah. I needed a partner to be, I certainly had a certain level of insecurity as you go through your teens and your early 20s, certainly masked in this. I'm sure if I were to look back at myself, I'd be quite embarrassed, maybe like a kind of a machismo, athletic kind of, that was maybe overconfident, if you will. But again, there's certainly insecurities just lying in weight in the body. And then, so for me to go out and explore on my own after that, I think subconsciously I needed a partner. And so Carrie and I met our first year at Sauhegan. She was there. She went to University of New Hampshire through a road less traveled as well. She grew up in Chicago and then did the typical route to the University of Iowa, where she was in the writers program there. And then she and her friends decided, wait a minute, we got to get out of here. So they applied to a bunch of schools around the country, and they all got into UNH and went there.
Oh, cool!
And got in a station wagon, drove out, and went to UNH. So anyway, at UNH, she got into education. She's also into dance and so on. And they have a program with Sauhegan where they would give her credit for first year teaching there. Uh-huh. So so we taught there together for 3 years. We were friends at first. She also saw my, I think, machismo, masked, overconfident self, and she always tells the story the first time she met me when when I showed up the first day of teacher orientation. We were at like an offsite retreat. I showed up in my tan little Volvo sedan that my grandfather gave me. And I had literally just driven from Martha's Vineyard, where I was on a tall ship for the summer, and I was all scrubby and unshaven, and I showed up at this like proper teacher orientation training, and I showed up late, and I walked into the room. She tells the story. She's like, "Who is this guy? Who does he think he is?" And
definitely getting married. That's how it always starts.
Right.
Who is this guy?
Yeah. Yep. So, but we were certainly just friends, and colleagues, and got to know each other better over those 3 years. And by the third year, it was meant to be, and we got engaged. We got engaged at the Baha'i Temple in Chicago, which the Temple. And the Baha'i faith really that really has we're not actively spiritual, I would say, but the Baha'i faith really nos cae bien. It how do you say that? It falls well with us. In English, it resonates with us. And so we went there for a day, and that's where I proposed to her. And of course, I didn't have a ring. I just felt the energy of wanting to propose to her, so I did it. Wow. Didn't get down on a knee. I said, "Do you want to get married?" She's like, "Yeah, let's get married." Okay, let's do this. And that was our third year teaching. We were out visiting her parents, so then we went out and got the ring, and then we went home, and then that's when I asked her parents for permission. It was all reverse. Everything was reverse about our world. And within a half year, we had our wedding on Cape Cod. Say goodbye to everyone, and that's where your bookmark picks up.
So where'd you go?
So we went to Brazil. We had read some books. Bill McKibben wrote some books, Hope, Human and Wild, and then a few others. And we learned about this really progressive third world city in Brazil called Curitiba. Mm-hmm. And we were basically like, we can go anywhere in the world. Where are we going to go? We barely had any money, but we'll figure it out. So we identified Curitiba as a place we wanted to go. They had really progressive thoughts on how you manage a third world urban center. For example, Jaime Lerner, who was the mayor of that city back in the 80s and 90s, I think, he, against the will of everybody in the city, was like, we're going to shut off, 10 square blocks of our city or more in the very center of the city to increase pedestrian traffic. And everybody was against it. All the businesses were against it. And sure enough, they did it. And sure enough, the city, thrived because of it. Yeah. Instead of investing in a subway, they just created separate lanes that were blocked off by curbs for the buses. And then they tell me if I'm going into too much detail, because this is just such a wonderful journey. Really they built platforms for the buses, so you'd pay before you got into the platforms, and then you'd just be at the level of the bus, and boom, you're in the bus. You don't have to be paying any bus driver. You've paid as if it was a subway. So like innovative things like that. Yeah. They'd pay the homeless folks for trash pickup. So you had homeless folks cruising around the city picking up the trash, and then they'd bring it to a distribution center, and they get paid. And just simple things that don't require a lot of investment, but do require thought and faith.
Yeah.
So we lived there for a year. We taught English, met some wonderful Brazilians down there, and just immersed ourselves in that culture. We learned Portuguese, and just it was like a year-long honeymoon. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
And from there, we traveled Brazil. We went back to where my parents had gone to in Minas Gerais, which is a really rural province of Brazil. We went, and after learning Portuguese and feeling comfortable with everything, we traveled to Minas Gerais, to the town where they spent 2 years of their life and worked with the local families on progressive farming techniques and things like that. And we went there, and like the people they were just in tears, because the last time they saw my parents were my age, and Carrie and I kind of emanate a similar energy to them.
Yeah.
And it was just this like 1 week of just insane emotional experiences with them. We mimicked a lot of their journeys, like over the hills to the Roça, where they would do work with ex-family, and then we took a long bike ride, and see if I get the chills, right? Took a long bike ride with one of the boys who was younger at the time. He was in primary school, whatever, but they had a huge impact on him. So we cruised around, and he showed us all the places that they'd been, and all the things that they did, and people had pictures, that they'd stored away for a while, and they brought out the pictures and showed. I mean, it was a trip, and we did, it was magical. And everyone was inviting us to dinner and telling us stories, and we had enough Portuguese where we could really engage with them in a meaningful way. And when we left, I just remember the whole. I'm not going to exaggerate too much, but not too much hyperbole here. But there's the town was kind of bidding us farewell, and everybody was crying, and tell Walter and Carolina that we love them, and they still maintain contact with some of these families, and so it's just Brazil was that was the best year of our lives for sure. Just traveling the country, first living in Curitiba, and then traveling around and getting to know really just a truly wonderful series of just wonderful culture.
One of my favorite actors is Bill Murray, and he says very clearly, he has very beautiful ways of putting things, and he says, before you marry somebody, travel the world with them.
Wow.
Because then by the end of that trip, you're going to know if you can be with this person long term.
I'll connect with that because, yes, absolutely. And we knew. I mean, whether it was when we both had we were on a bus ride between Brasilia and it was after Minas Gerais, and I think we drank some bad water on the bus, and we both had big diarrhea on the bus and everything, and when we went camping with bad stomachs, and we're just like tag teaming our the stomach problems, and that's when you really know. And we knew we had such a good time. We just clicked in so many different ways. When one was up, the other we bring each other up when necessary, and life continues like that. Our emotional roller coaster of running a school and being actively involved in this community continues. It's wonderful, but we need each other. There are certain times when she may be down and she needs me, and vice versa.
Sure.
Although she's generally up. She's generally up.
Well,
so
you have this trip, and you come back. You come back to New England,
barely.
Okay,
because it just from there the journey continues. Like it didn't.
So tell us about kind of how. Let's call it a calling. That's the word we use, but there's clearly I'll get you there. Some yearning in you to give, to offer, to teach, to lead. When do all these things begin to kind of pour into some expression, some clear expression?
great. Well, during when we were at Sauhegan High School, the public high school that we met at and taught at, we were inspired by a lot of wonderful educators. It was a school that was a coalition of essential schools, which was a concept of different, more progressive education concept, differentiated assessment. The idea came about with Ted Sizer, who was a Harvard, an educator at Harvard University School of Education, and he inspired just kind of a more progressive movement to how we think about children and how we think about evaluating children, how they learn, and so on. So we were just surrounded by all these minds that prescribed to this more progressive educational philosophy. So literally, when we were at Sauhegan, we wrote this kind of I don't know if you'd call it a manifesto of some sort of this school that we wanted to found. It was called the Wild School, and I even went so far as to visit Wild School, World of Integrated Learning and Discovery.
Yeah,
Wild, right? Yeah. So we even went and visited some cool places in southern New Hampshire as we were thinking about our next life path, because we realized that although Sauhegan was awesome and the life was awesome, it's like it was too perfect. We needed to escape. What were we going to do? So we even explored like sites where we could have this school. We visited an old barn that could be used as a school facility. We were out there, and in terms of how we viewed. How idealistic we were in the world of what we could do with education, just like put kids out in an empty field and let them explore type thing. Yeah. Very project based. One trimester was going to be on a boat, another trimester was going to be hiking in the wilderness, and that's how kids were going to learn. Yeah. So that was there. Like we wanted it. It was just, but we recognized that maybe that wasn't the right time. We needed some more experience, and maybe this is probably all subconscious, but we definitely actively, created this whole course description and everything. We went deep with that, but then Brazil came along. So then after Brazil, we learned about international schools. It's a whole subculture of schooling where, that serves expat communities, government officials around the world, generally in cities around the world. Yeah. And generally you have to go back to the United States and go to these fairs, like these hiring fairs, and we're not going to do that. So we just sent applications all around the world. Literally all around the world. Like, where are we going to end up? And we got the only bite we got, because normally they only hire via these fairs that you have to spend an arm and a leg to go to, was from a school in Guatemala City. So we went to Guatemala City, and we spent 2 years there, and that's where we met our friends for life, Sarah and Brian, who helped Sarah McGowan and Brian Kreitz, who helped who were our co-founders. Yeah. And so we met, they were in their second year generally you do 2-year stints at these schools. And they, we had a phenomenal time there, learned a lot about, Guatemalan culture and the injustices that are going on there. I mean, the history of that country is sad, for lack of a better word, with 50% of the country being Mayan, of indigenous descent, and 50% being of European mix, and to see what they have done to marginalize the cultures there is tragic. But there's a lot of do-gooder organizations who we became acquainted with who were trying to empower the Mayan population again, but it's tricky. Yeah. So that was a wonderful experience. But we were teaching the Guatemalan elite, which is a highly, it's a tiny subset of the Guatemalan population, which generally controls the entire country, and they're quite opinionated, if you will, in their views of Guatemalan culture, and quite entitled, and that's, you generally see that in these elite international schools. And for us, we were coming from Sauhegan, which was also teaching generally entitled youth. There wasn't so much poverty there. I think it's easy to kind of foo-foo that and say, oh yes, like it's easy to teach the entitled youth. I think it's important because, unfortunately, due to our essentially caste-based system that we all live in, we need to help guide them so that if they're going to stumble upon a future leadership role, they have the open-minded, critical thinking skills that are going to help them lead. Because many times they're going to stumble upon it because their dad's in charge of X, and or whatnot. So anyway, so that we experienced that. our friends Sarah and Brian got a job down in the school in Costa Rica called Country Day School, which had just opened a branch on the beach here about 2 kilometers down the road.
Really?
It's since closed down. It's near Conchal.
Yeah.
This was in early 2000s. And we were like, wow, that's really cool. So we finished our second year while they were in their first year in Costa Rica. And we visited them during their first year and said, we want to come here. So we applied for jobs there and got jobs there. and that was just down the road from this school. So we experienced life in rural Costa Rica, a place that was really trying to deal with the challenges of an aggressive kind of globalization form of microcosm of globalization. I say this area is where there was just an onslaught of foreign investment. It was like, the gold rush. Yeah. You look at articles back in the early 2000s about Costa Rica, like that's where you come, invest in your land, this place is going to explode. So people were doing that, taking away the farms from the locals and so on, like the beginning of kind of a neo-colonialist push that you see happen around the world in this more globalized economy. Yeah. And we saw it happening, and things at the Country Day School were certainly didn't work out, and we all looked at each other and Carrie and I were going to go home. We were going to go, and we applied for a couple jobs up in Maine. We looked at looking in rural Maine, maybe going back, maybe getting back into the New England lifestyle, maybe Burlington. Yeah,
sure.
Right.
Burlington,
Just like go into a little progressive little New England niche, right? And then there was just there was something itching. This was in May of 2007, and we also taught with some of our other friends, David and Kelly Dodge, they had been down in the Tamarindo, Guanacaste, Costa Rica area for years. They had been around for at least 15 years, and they were really highly respected educators. We were hanging out, the 6 of us, one night at their place over in Playa Grande. And it was a Playa Grande sunset where something had popped into my head, and I was just kind of enjoying a beverage with David, and this is at least the way I remember it. And I was just like, David, I've been thinking about this. What happens if we start our own school? Like, we love this place. There's stuff going on here that's concerning to us. Why don't we start our own school to help start addressing this gap between the local and the foreign cultures, the marginalization of both the environment and the people, which was happening, and I remember we walked back up to the house, and Brian, Sarah, Carrie, and Kelly were there. We were all just hanging out, and I'm like, let's do this. Let's start the school. So that was it. So I put some full energies into planning, and we all, this is a super long story short, by the way, we all rented a house in Playa Grande, and it was for a month, and we just spent intensive time planning. This is in June. The school year started 2 months later. We had no permits, no anything. We didn't have a place. We didn't have a name. Yeah. And then one of our friends at the other school was like, what happens if you call it La Paz? We're like, oh, that's a good name. And then we combined it. We played it around. We were all hanging around. These planning sessions ultimately turned into like debauchery. It was so fun. It was the best month of just creative energy, flowing. And La Paz Community School came out of that planning. The location came out of that dialogue with a local surfer who I had shared with you that story recently. He was an ex-cop from Culver City, did Vice in the 80s outside LA, and I surfed with him, and someone suggested that I ask him about his facilities, which were dormant because 2 years earlier in 2005, he had lost his 8-year-old son, 10-year-old son, wife, and family friends to a tragic plane accident off the coast. And the place was, like I said, it was dormant. And I went and I said, Don, his name was Don Ritz. He still lives in the area, a great friend of the school. Don, we want to start a school. We want to start a small, bilingual school that includes the community, experiential, place-based learning, the kids learning in this wonderful habitat of Guanacaste, a mixture, half Costa Ricans, half foreigners who've chosen to live down here. And he just looked at me and said, yep, okay, let's do it. Let's take a walk through the facilities. We can put a classroom here. We can put a classroom here. You can use the gym. All you got to do is pay for electricity. Let's go. He's like super type A,
Wow.
And that's the beginning. So that was in June or July. Maybe July is when we nailed the facilities. And we then had, all of a sudden, we were knocking on doors around the communities, sharing the idea. This is all the six of us. And then trying to find some Costa Rican educators who could join us.
Yeah.
And we found Profe Zinnia, who's still with us today, and her nephew, who went in other paths earlier in the launch of the school, but he worked with us for a few years. And we found Jennifer Cerdas to work in the office, and she's now our operations manager. So she's been with us for 11 years. So there's 9 of us. And we formed a board of directors, a nonprofit association, went to get the permits in San Jose. I don't know how, the story is so improbable in so many ways, but it was so exciting because here we are, like the 6 of us, or it was the 4 of us gringos who went to San Jose to try to get the permits for the school. And we went to the Ministry of Education. And we went to the Ministry of Education building and had a meeting with them. And the director at the time was brutal. And she's just like, basically, she's like, get out of my office. You have no chance, gringos. And Sarah and Carrie burst into tears in front of her. And we're like, no, you don't understand. This is something that's going to really help the local community. It's going to be incredible. And long story short, she softened a little bit. A year later, actually, it's like a few months later, she retired, and this wonderful man, Minor Villalobos, came in to take charge of the Ministry of Education for private schools. And really supported us. And we got our permits. We got our permits for the facilities, everything, health. And in the meantime, there's certainly folks in our community who were not excited about this idea. They thought it was maybe aggressively competitive with the other school down the road, the Country Day School, right? Yeah. So we were getting this barrage of government officials visiting us to make sure we had our I's and dotted and T's crossed. And sure enough, we did. And it actually helped us tremendously. It was a great life lesson, just in terms of, you give energy. If you give energy to things in negative ways, how do you, first of all, don't give energy to things in negative ways. That's a waste of energy. Right. And second of all, if you're receiving that negative energy, what do you do with it? And we learned the most valuable lesson. It's just like you receive that energy because it's energy, can't be created or destroyed. And then you give it out to the world as positive. Mm-hmm. You do not respond to that negative energy. It's useless. It's one of the La Paz problem-solving strategies, choose to just ignore it. And a lot of times if you just ignore things, absorb them, and then release them in a positive light, probably something that our world could use a lot of right now. Yeah. So we teach that, really try to bring that out in our students here.
So I've got to ask you. I've got to ask you. There's two big things I want to unpack through that timeline that you just described. One is, I'll start with this one first, since we're getting into some of the mechanics of it. But you guys are largely expat gringos here. You have this vision for this progressive, exciting school. Yeah. And what's beautiful is that we're over a decade past that, and it's flourishing. I mean, it's wonderful. It's a tremendous place to be. It's got great energy. It's a beautiful creation. But at that time, as you describe it, there's this onslaught of Western influence here. People buying land, building hotels. I mean, it's becoming like a resort community, basically. Right. And your vision was to include the locals. So what sensitivities, what conversations, what did you include at that time in order to excite them and to really include them in this process so that they didn't feel like this was yet another endeavor that was going to just absorb their environment?
That's a really good question, because that was like the pillar of us starting. It was everything we were doing was bucking that reality that the locals were experiencing. So step one was to create a nonprofit association. Nonprofit associations can't make money. So we showed our, through our actions. Step two, visit with local leaders. There was a local leader named Gerardo Brenes who was essential to the founding of the school. He was the one who kind of held our hands as we walked through all the different ministries and the municipality to get things done. He was definitely a doer. And we formed a board of directors. It was half Costa Rican and half foreign. So every action was a bipartisan action between the locals and the foreigners. You know, the door-to-door visits, the involvement in the other local nonprofits, the visiting of the local schools, just to show them, first of all, we spoke the language quite well, and to show them that we were in it for a we attitude, an inclusive attitude. And now if you walk around the La Paz community and you ask anybody about La Paz, they're going to give you that feedback. It's like it's a place where everyone's welcome. Yep. And that's years of hard work and never deviating from the dual immersion concept, where Spanish language value is equal, if not more important than English language value, despite what's happening in the world. Yeah. Now, I'm not going to tell you that we're in a constant battle against the power of the English language here. And I'm not saying that we're trying to tear down the English language. How do we just kind of like make sure that it's considered on a level playing field to the Spanish language, to the local language, because the locals want their kids to learn English, because that's the key to a successful life, supposedly. And the foreigners, less so in terms of the Spanish language. The foreigners, of course, they want the cultural integration, but it's what we've noticed as time has gone on is that more and more we're able to filter, and we're able to find the foreigners who really value the importance of the Spanish language and cross-cultural competence. Mm-hmm. Cross-cultural competence is kind of one of those key features of an effective dual immersion program, where you're using the culture and the place to teach the language so that it's relevant to the students. Mm-hmm. Rather than saying, okay, like today we're going to learn Mandarin. Like, why? How's that connected to? Right. Yeah, because most of the world, speaks it. Well, okay, but right here they don't. Yeah, so how are we going to make it relevant? So the relevance piece is huge. You're asking that question. I mean, it's just every action is so intentional, so inclusive in terms of all publications, English and Spanish. Our scholarship program, where we have. A good percentage of the school are on scholarship, where they pay maybe $10 per month to go to the school. Mm-hmm. So 50% of our school, or almost 50% of the school, is on financial aid. So you have that inclusion of socioeconomic levels. So like I said, some people are paying $10 per month to go to school. Other people are paying, $600 per month to go to the school. So we have multi-zillionaires going to school with kids who are living in really simple living conditions. Yeah. Does it matter? No. And that's what's going on here at the school.
And that beautifully segues to the other thing I wanted to unpack. And it sort of is I think it starts in a general way. You described earlier these wild schools that you were interested in. The wild school. Integrated Learning and Discovery. And so that was excited by something. That was excited. Clearly, I'd like you to talk about the contrast that has forged this vision, meaning you've experienced education, you've seen all kinds of models, and clearly there was part of you through that process filtering out the things that seemed to work, things that didn't seem to work, the things that would be helpful, like putting kids in the middle of a field and just seeing kind of where they wander, what they're excited by. Talk about kind of the vision, maybe the vision, and how it was spawned through all these experiences that you and this nucleus of people had at the beginning had seen. Like, this place does not feel like a school, like the school that I went to. This does not feel like that. There's a reason for that, and it's clearly very intentional, to use your word. So let's understand kind of where this vision comes from, what sort of experiences helped lead to this, and then maybe you could talk about the vision, which I think has something to do with this logo and, it's self, family, community, and mundo, world. Yep. So you're kind of starting with one and then expressing it all the way out to everybody. Yeah. Anyway, so I'd like to hear the vision kind of fleshed out, and even talk about how it's expressed here today, because it's very alive.
Thank you. That's a great question, because the wild school concept was super on the left of progressive educational thought. Very little, there's no discrete units of learning in terms of, there's no, mathematics separated from social studies, separated from English. It was super interdisciplinary, experiential, place-based. And that, kids learn most effectively when things are relevant to them, when they can connect to them. And that's where the creativity and the exploration really come out in the student. So the idea of filling the pail, it's better, with the quote of lighting the fire rather than filling the pail in terms of education. Right. Whereas, unfortunately, a lot of our maybe more traditional education models are focused on filling the pail. And so we, from the wild school, so that kind of lay dormant while we went through Guatemala, which was quite traditional. Like I taught physics in Guatemala, and it was, and even at that point, I was kind of acquiescing to the traditional sense, but I was trying to push the limits, but I was still in a classroom and wasn't able to maybe see bring out the wild school in me. And so as we thought about La Paz, wild school definitely came to mind. But it's interesting, as you introduce a new paradigm into an existing paradigm, you need to be sensitive to that existing paradigm. If you drop wild school into rural Costa Rica in 2007, nothing's going to happen. It's just, and it still wouldn't happen. So we definitely had to bend a bit towards the traditional model to be able to even think about bringing out the place-based experiential experience that we wanted to have for the kids in rural Guanacaste. So yes, I mean, and Sarah and Brian came from, and David and Kelly came from more progressive educational circles out in the Pacific Northwest. So they equally brought their experiences to the table. And as we were thinking about the founding principles of the school, as we developed the peace practices, which were focused on really the self, and how the self interacts with their family, their community, and their world. That's really what ultimately defined the school. It was another form of progressivism, because we still have, although we have a very interdisciplinary approach, by high school we still have some discrete classes of the subject matter, if you will. Sure. So, but what we learned, and this is where it goes to the experience you have when you walk around the school, is that the most important thing for a student interacting with their school environment is that they feel loved and comfortable from that first moment that they walk into the doors of the school. And that's hopefully what you see here, and that's what people respond with. They're like, wow, like these kids are so casual, they're so comfortable in their own skin. They at morning meeting, they stand up and communicate in front of 100 kids without any concern, worry. They're risk takers. And so we learned that our version of progressivism, the evolved version of progressivism, was really balancing the teaching of socio-emotional skills, which were the old school would consider them soft skills, how you interact with people, how you interact across cultures, how you empathize with people, that those were equally, if not more important than the traditional academic skills that we're teaching. So we spend so much time at the school teaching those skills through morning meeting, through our advisory program, through our excursions, which are going out and interacting with the local community and the local environment. Like, that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to develop passionate, lifelong learners who can fearlessly explore the world and try to make it a better place. I don't care if they go to university. I don't care if they extend their studies in any way. As long as they're passionate, lifelong learners who can fearlessly make the world a better place, then we're good, and we're all good. And as they do this exploration of self, family, community, and world through their studies here, they recognize, how it's kind of ironic to say, I guess, they're significant, but at the same time, they have to recognize their insignificance. The world is a huge place. And they have to come to terms with that. Like when I was visiting my brother in New York City this past winter, it just really, Carrie and I, you come from this world in Guanacaste where you think like this is just the most important thing on the planet. And then you go to New York City and no one cares about what you're doing. Right. It's like, oh yeah, okay, Costa Rica, yeah, that island in the middle of the Caribbean, right? I'm like, no, that's Puerto Rico, but okay, next time. Yeah. So I think it's humbling to recognize really how insignificant this is, and but at the same time, having the fundamental belief that just what we're doing here is making an impact in some little way in this tiny little niche of the world that is focusing on making the world a better place. And a more peaceful place. I'm not afraid to say that school is about creating a more peaceful world. I'm not afraid to say that school is about love. It's about love, compassion, empathy, and peace. Yeah, the academics are part of it. We are accredited by the International Baccalaureate Program, which is a highly prestigious, high school accreditation program. But that's not the heart of it all.
Yeah.
Am I answering the question of how that evolved from wild school to what you see here? Which
beautiful.
Yeah. So.
I think one thing that would be clarifying about that is for you to talk about this morning session.
The morning meeting. Yeah.
Morning meeting, and talk about how it arose and what it exactly happens. One thing that I'll share about in the intro to this, I'll talk a little bit before we get into this interview, but is how Teresa and I became aware of the school and you, which is through our friend whose son goes to school here. And Phil told us this story about how, I guess he visited the school and attended that meeting and knew. And Phil's a very discriminating, extremely intelligent man. He knew in the middle of that meeting, like, this is where I want my boy to go to school. Because there's something special about that meeting, which is extremely uncommon when it comes to the educational system in the Western world. This kind of thing doesn't happen. So I'd love for you to, I think that's a wonderful lens through which to understand what happens here with some specificity, is to talk about where that came from and what exactly happens there.
So I forgot to mention, as I was going through my early childhood and that journey, is that I grew up Quaker up until I was 10 years old. Right. Yes. And so the religious component of the Quaker world maybe didn't impact me so much, but the meeting was certainly impactful. So when we in June of 2007, when I was flying home, I forget, I was flying either to Costa Rica or from Costa Rica. I was by myself, and I sat next to two educators from the Quaker School, which is in Monteverde, the Friends School, which is in Monteverde, Costa Rica.
Yes, we talked to Marvin Rockwell.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
A month ago.
Yeah, he's a legend, right?
Yeah,
so there's some educators there, and I always ask the question whenever I'm talking with educators casually, what's one thing from your school that you wish could be at every school?
Oh, what a great question.
Right? And they said, morning meeting. And I was like, and then all of a sudden, to jog my memory of the Quaker morning meeting, I was like, well, it's kind of, okay, how do we lapazify that? We talk about lapazifying things. How do you just tweak it so that it really fits with what we're trying to do here? And the one thing about the Quaker morning meetings is it's not necessarily a circle-driven. You kind of all sitting, maybe even in pews sometimes, as I grew up. But so we transformed that into a circle meeting, but with the same concept that you spoke when you feel pushed, when you feel like you would like to speak. But how do you bring that out in kids? Mm-hmm. And how do you empower the kids to be to own the meeting? So at our first morning meetings, we always start with a moment of silence. Our primary school students do morning meeting every day for 20 to 30 minutes. Our upper school students do it twice per week for 35 minutes each. Mm-hmm. So when we started, we were K through 6. We had 50 students K through 6 11 years ago. And we had some bells, like yoga bells, if you will. Ding. Yeah. And that's what we call attention. And kids would kind of be quiet for a while. And then few months into it, we kept forgetting the yoga bells, but something amazing happened. And that was kids would go up in the morning meeting, they get into their circle, and, good morning, say hello to each other, chat. And then all of a sudden the meeting just started getting quiet without anybody saying anything, no teacher saying anything. And then you just sit there quietly for a while. And then someone raises their hand and says something, or stands up and says something. Mm-hmm. And so we brought a little bit of inorganic pieces to that when we had each class share something. Like we prescribed each class sharing something in that meeting, sharing something about what they're learning, what they're experiencing, something going on in the community. But beyond that, it was just kind of sharing out what you saw, what you were doing, what was going on, whose birthday it was, who did a good job the other day in singing or whatever. Yeah. So very organic with just one kind of staple to it, which is ensuring that classes have an opportunity to share out what they're learning. Mm-hmm. You go to the morning meeting today, now we'll have 150 kids in morning meetings sitting in a circle, 200 kids on Friday. Wow. When it's K through 8. Yeah. And they're all big buddy, little buddy matched up, which is another huge part of the school that I didn't get into. I have this like a cursory glance, right? But the big buddy, little buddy really helps with those socio-emotional skills as well, and the empathy. They work together on various projects. Mm-hmm. So they're sitting together, and you walk there, and it's the same thing. No one needs any yoga bells anymore. It's just, it falls silent. And that's the thing that Phil, your friend, and anybody who is observing it, they're like, what are you giving these kids to make them do that? Because that's not normal. Yeah. And it's all just about, first of all, you're empowering them. They run the meetings now, so the teachers don't have to do too much, and empowering them to believe that they can regulate their own behavior, that they can make themselves peaceful without anybody saying, which is for me like the worst song in the worst sound in education. Anytime anybody goes shh or s, or here in Latin America it's tss, in the United States it's shh, like no, like we did the shush thing when they were babies and we're trying to get them to sleep, but kids don't want to be shushed. Okay, stop shushing. Yeah. so you create an expectation, and the students believe in themselves. They believe that they can do this. They don't need an adult telling them, and that's part of another piece of the philosophy that starts in preschool. It's kind of a Vygotsky-esque, Lev Vygotsky, who kind of posited this idea that students don't need to be told right from wrong. They know it deep down inside if you ask them. And you see this coming out in kids at La Paz. Yeah. You get a tour of the school. You see kids walking around the school. They're like, "Where's the teacher?" Like they'll be doing things. There'll be no teacher around, but they're doing the right thing. Like they're not, searching through Facebook or something. While it's an 8th grader who's working on an essay, and they're just hanging out in the hammock. And that self-regulating behavior is a huge feature of the school. Not sure how I ended up there. That was morning meeting. Yeah, morning meeting for sure is like the essence of the school. It brings out every aspect. When an educator really goes through that with discerning, goes and looks at that meeting with discerning eyes, there are thousands of lessons that happen in a 5-minute period that are all going on at the same time. Active listening, eye contact, projection of voice. So you have the listener experience, but you also have the presenter experience. The question and comment section. There's so many opportunities to learn through that experience. So if there's one thing that I wish every school could have, it is the morning meeting circle time in primary school and all the way through secondary school, because it is essential to creating that loving, peaceful, caring environment that kids need to feel like they can do anything. We want them to be comfortable in their learning environment, so there's nothing holding them back. And there's so many other manifestations of that at school. We have the coffee house and the juice box, which are these monthly performances where kids just come to the stage. Like they just kind of sign up and informally and say they want to present something. And it's 5:00 p.m. here. The sun's going down. We're on that stage that you saw during the tour. Yeah. And, there's a couple hundred people show up and they just perform, whether it's like a terrible rendition of an Elsa song from what's that from what's the movie, the Disney, anyway, Frozen, right? Or whether it's a completely unique dance presentation or a song that a student created. You see as the students go along in their careers and they get older, that that creativity comes out on the stage and it's embraced. And again, that's another thing, that if someone like Phil comes, if someone like you watches that. I was there the other night and these new parents were watching these kids performing without fear. And they turned, one of them, I didn't know what they were thinking. I was like, I wonder if they're not liking this, because they were really serious. And one of them turned around to me and said, Abel, this is the most incredible thing I have seen children do in my life. And I'm like, oh, he's like, you don't understand. Yeah. And it's true. At this point, I don't understand, because I've been in this world now for 11 years and it's the norm.
Yeah.
And we want to figure out a way to, spread the word and make this more the norm everywhere.
So let's get into that. But first, I'd love for you. So when we talk about these soft skills, which in at least the educational upbringing I had were not featured at all. It was very much about curriculum and really about grades and doing well enough so that you get to the next level, which in my case was college. So let's talk about grades, because you indicated to me earlier that you have a different approach to that, which shouldn't surprise anybody. Talk about kind of how you treat that and how success and failure, like words you used with me earlier, which I think we should elaborate on, are how they're dealt with here, what they are really about.
I think maybe I'd start that by talking about just the fundamental principle of motivation. How do you motivate kids? And there's two ways to motivate people. There's extrinsic motivation and there's intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation is the trophy grade, high performance based world that I grew up in Holliston Public High School, which helped form who I am today. I'm not going to overly criticize that sometimes you need extrinsic motivation. Okay. But that's very easy to provide. A disciplinary approach that's penal. If you do this, then this happens. And academics, if you get all the answers right, then you get 100% an A+, right? It makes sense. What's harder to teach is the intrinsic piece, which is I'm going to do this because it's the right thing to do, not because I'm going to get rewarded. And those soft skills are all 100% aligned with that intrinsic motivation piece. And our evaluation system is the same thing. It's a 0 through 4 system, 4 being exemplary, 3 being proficient, 2 being developing, 1 being emerging. There's no failure in that. And the failure piece is that word is a very good word. When we were starting the school, and we allude to this a lot with the kids, we failed so many times, and we continue to fail. Yes, we continue to fail. We just had a board meeting where we just realized that we made a significant error in our Excel spreadsheet on our budget, and it ended up being like an error of a couple tens of thousands of, and that was an error. That was a failure. And anyway, we're figuring that all out, and it's going to be fine. But that's great. Like, you have to embrace that. At the end of the meeting, I'm like, this is what it's all about. This is what we want our kids to experience every day. We need to let them fail. We need to let them know, first of all, that there's an infinite amount of things that they can learn. So when our grading scale, a 3 means you're meeting grade level expectations. A 4 is when you go above and beyond through an innovative, creative, not thought about before approach to your project, to your experience, to your exam, where we're working with teachers to make sure it's okay to give exams. Fair enough. But how do you give an exam where there's opportunities for students to show that they know more than is expected of them, right? So the intrinsic piece is the fact that today we're in conferences. All of our students come to school with their parents, and they lead their parents through a journey of their learning for the trimester. They have to do it, but they don't get graded. that's completely the opposite of an extrinsically motivated system. All the way through 10th grade, they put together these portfolios. They spend hours and hours on these portfolios when they could be spending hours and hours studying for final exams. It doesn't even occur to them that they're not being graded. Yeah. Why? Because they have to stand in front of their parents. They have to share and walk them through this journey. They have to practice and go through it. And in the end, the only kudos they get is, hey, nice job on this. Yeah. But on paper, nowhere, to colleges and universities, we're not sharing that.
Yeah.
So that's powerful. And I should mention about the evaluation piece as well, the assessment piece. We do think a lot about Bloom's taxonomy, which is this concept that when the students are learning, the base of their knowledge, which is important but not the key, is content. Right? It's at the very base of our learning pyramid. Okay, you need to know something in order to do something with it, right? Mm-hmm. But as our 0 through 4 system is based on, a 1 and 2 means you grasp some of the content. But as you go towards 3 and 4, that's when you're doing something interesting with the concept. Yeah. That's where you're being innovative. That's where you're being creative. That's where you're creating change. Yeah. And we want our students to be change makers. People who identify problems and then through no fear of failure, try to solve the problems. Yeah. And so we have this program at school called the Anchor Projects. In pre-K all the way through grade 12, students experience these year-long projects. In 6th grade, they run the chicken coop. So they're responsible for managing the chicken coop, making sure that it's financially sustainable. They sell the eggs at the feria, which the farmers market every Wednesday underneath their Guanacaste tree, and then they use that income to improve the infrastructure of their chicken coop and maybe get a few more chickens. And so every class has their own project. By 11th and 12th grade, those projects turn to these creativity, activity, and service projects, where they have to combine their passions with community needs, mm-hmm. and create something that's going to have an enduring impact on the community. So whether, I could go on forever. I don't know how much you want to go into this, but it's like these are all the ways of thinking about intrinsic motivation. They're doing these things. The chicken project, there's no anchor project grade on their report card. The chicken project they just do because it's interesting, it's relevant. They're citizens of the school. Yes, they're part of it. They're part of that experience. So if they don't participate, it's their loss. I always tell I teach this class called Theory of Knowledge, which asks the fundamental question: how do you know what you know? How do you know it? Like people are like, I know it. How do you know that? Where does it come from? And I always tell them, they come to class. They're 11th graders. And they're coming from the 10th grade program. First day of school, I'm just like, I just need you to know one thing. That is, you don't need to be here. If you don't want to be here, you don't have to be here. Right? This is not, okay? You got that. If you need to leave, you leave. And of course, they don't leave. Yeah, they want to be there. It's interesting. Yeah. It's relevant. They're part of a community. So it's a form of including everyone through this intentional teaching of these, quote, soft skills, which are now called SES, socio-emotional skills. Mm-hmm. The reason they're so shied away from in the traditional system is because it's so difficult to evaluate them. They want to attach a number to them. Mm-hmm. And I've been to a couple conferences. They're like, this is a rubric for how you can evaluate social-emotional skills. But that's the antithesis of what we want out of the socio-emotional skills. Like, we don't want them to feel like they're being evaluated on how they're behaving. Yeah. Right, on how those soft skills, that's the opposite of intrinsic motivation. Yeah, we want them to do it just because it's the right thing to do. Anyway, I digress. I keep thinking about all these other aspects of the school, but the Anchor Project experience is cool. We're working with this program right now called The Wonderment, which is another nonprofit out of Utah, and they're trying to get our Anchor Project experience. They're trying they've been spending hours at the school on several visits, and they're trying to really capture what that program is so that it can be replicable in all kinds of educational organizations around the world. And it's been fun. They've been kind of touring and interviewing our students and trying to find out what's the essence of this? How can we get this out of La Paz? And that's the big question. Yeah, how can we get these things out of La Paz, mm-hmm. So that more of the world can experience them and see them? Because this has been an 11-year process that's been very carefully constructed. Yeah. Where do we go from here? And that's where the organization is right now. It's like, where do we go from here? We have a few things more to do with the master plan. But beyond that, where, we have a waiting list of over 100 kids to get into the school. Basically have a balanced budget. We're like a $2.5 million budget to run the school. We require 10 to 20% of our school requires donations. So like the operation, we have to fundraise for them to support our scholarship program. Okay, so we have this boutique school in Paradise that's doing some pretty cool and exciting stuff, and people get inspired when they come here. Yeah. We have a visiting educator program where visiting educators come down from. We have UConn that's coming down soon. We have Niagara University, George Mason University. Cool. They come down and they experience the school and they support us in the classrooms, and then the idea is they take those with them.
Yeah.
To whether their university program, or we also have visiting teachers that come. They're just they need to be inspired, so they come down here and it's called the Discover La Paz Visiting Educator Program. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. It's an exciting time to be a leader of this organization. I have my kids in the school, so I got nowhere to go. I have kindergartner, third grader, Carrie and I. So there's no other place we'd rather be. And we'll see what the future holds. There's lots of. I've in the past week, I've had phone calls, people from various other areas in Costa Rica who are like, "We want to put La Paz in our community." I'm like, "Great, you have land and a couple $1 million." Right. Because I'm not doing this again. Starting from we started from zero and zero with just an idea 11 years ago. We didn't even have a name of a school, and here we are here today.
We probably should start to wrap up, but I'm
looking at the time. Wow.
Yeah. But in thinking about the goal of a school, and if we use one child as just kind of our lens to understand that, the schooling structure that I came through is really about kind of elevating me into a workforce type path. We got to get you ready for a job. Right. That seemed to be the motivation, the current that flowed through all of my experiences. And in many cases, I bucked that current. I bucked that. I didn't want that. I was against that or whatever. And eventually it was perfect for me. I mean, it was really, really ideal. In this case, though, this kind of model where you're including so many of these soft skills, if you will, what is, you talked a little bit about like the child that emerges 18 years old from this process. What is the outlook? What's the horizon for that child? What is, in terms of the school's aim, what does that child then have that you feel somehow has been shaped by this experience?
Great question. So we have 41 alumni who have graduated from La Paz over the last 5 years, and I just sent out an alumni survey. I wanted to ask that question because we want to know, like, well, what is it? Because I got kids who are at Les Sorbonne in France, one of the top universities in France. I have kids a kid who's doing aeronautical engineering studies in Southern California. I have a kid who's being a ski bum in the French Alps right now. I mean, they're all over the place. They're all over the map. And there was all kinds of, little pieces that we can pull from those alumni surveys. But the overarching theme was basically that La Paz empowered them and gave them the skills to do whatever they wanted and didn't tell them what they had to do. Right? So it is a bit of it is kind of a bit of an entitled feeling to walk out of this place, but they don't know it. They're just like, okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to figure out. Even if I don't have any money, I'm going to go, be a ski bum for a while. And then from there, they're going to do something else. They're going to do something else. And ultimately, we have faith. We know that they're going to find their niche. And it's so fun to see these kids start falling into their niche. They're exploring for 4 or 5 years. Some went right into university because they were super academically driven, and university was their calling. Yeah. But others didn't know their calling. And they just needed to experience the world. So we want to give them as many keys as possible to open as many doors as possible whenever they want, however they want. Right. And that is true empowerment. And they're starting to fall into these, like the one who's doing the aeronautical engineering and the one who's about to graduate from the Sorbonne with this degree in language, something with language. She's learned a bunch of different languages and is now going into international relations, and they're all over the map, really. So our college and career planning experience is all just about exposing them to all the possibilities, including the possibility that you just don't know.
Yeah.
And some of the most interesting people we know didn't know what they were going to do maybe through their 40s. Right. Because we're just taught. It sounds like me. Yep. You're taught to, okay, I'm graduating high school. The high school says we have a college admissions acceptance rate of 96.3%. Like, oh, okay, how many of those kids actually completed university in 4 years? Right. And so that's my answer to that question.
Yeah. Well, I guess, to kind of come back full circle, and we talked about the school, we started talking about you. This is a very mature creation, this school and this endeavor. And I know there's more to come. You've got an arts wing you're working on. There's a pool and a gym kind of being built on the other side. All of these, by the way, La Paz is not kind of an isolated entity in the community. It's very much about inclusivity. There's a feria that happens here every week. The vision for the athletic facilities it's for the community. It's just here, and the students use it too. It's a porous environment in a beautiful way. But in kind of thinking about you now, like as you kind of map your terrain through this experience, like where do you see your calling kind of pulling you? Maybe it is in more La Paz's, or maybe it's in, or some, maybe not quite like the physical building of other schools, but a kind of a growth for yourself that kind of feels to be pulling at you as you're sitting here now it's a very mature creation. This is a very stable place. There's people here. There's an energy here that's very strong.
What an apropos question. I turned 40 years old yesterday, and we started the school when I was 29. Wow. Carrie was 29 as well. We're both 29, and I'm not gonna lie to you. We're definitely at a crossroads. Mm-hmm. We want our kids to graduate from the school that we created intentionally. Right. We're very carefully listening to the signs at this point.
Yeah.
Like I said, maybe 2020 is when we'd like to have the master plan complete, and we always got our finger on the pulse. We have families back in the United States who are, go self-family community world, and they have their needs as well. At this point, we're very fortunate to have healthy families who are doing well in the United States, and we are we're going to go ahead and see, just like the what we were talking about before with what we want out of our students, we live life the same way, and that's how this path has created itself. Of course. It's a road less traveled. It's filled with just living and experiencing life as it is in the moment, and taking it in the direction where you're feeling called. At this point, our calling is still La Paz. I have a sneaking suspicion that something big is going to be happening in the coming years, where someone's going to come in and say, I'm putting money behind this, and we're going to replicate this in a way that is significant. Mm-hmm. I'm okay if that doesn't happen either. Right. I'm not, in terms of the trophy, driven, Abel that I was and still am in some ways, in terms of that drive to complete things and get things done. I'm at this really peaceful place in my life where it's like, okay, if this is a boutique school in paradise that I get to, sit down and reflect on with wonderful people like you and just share this journey, I'm okay with that. Yeah. And I'm at peace with that, and but if it goes and deviates and goes in another direction, and then pura vida, as we say in Costa Rica, you know what? It's Costa Rica's taught me a lot in that way, to just kind of like ease up.
Yeah.
You know, it's been a perfect balance between how I was when I was raised and competing at that young age to, you know what? It really doesn't matter too much. So just do what you can to make this place a better place for all of us and more peaceful. Yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Well, we always end our interviews with a coda of 3 questions that kind of provide some consistency. So we'll get into those now. Question 1 is, what book or books up to 3, as an educator, as someone who's consciously thinking about kind of how to support people's expansion, this will be very interesting to hear. What book or books up to 3 would you recommend that every person should read?
Okay. The first one that always comes to mind it's called The Students Are Watching. And it was written by Ted Sizer, who was the fella I was actually, along with his wife, I think, who I was referring to before, the Coalition of Essential Schools, Harvard School of Education. And it's the book I recommend to anybody in the world of education. And it's just this recognition that everything that you do as a person is being watched. Mm-hmm. It's the essence of integrity. And we as teachers, we are the models for the students. We are, that whole community meeting, it happened because the teachers were models for the experience. If the kids aren't quieting down, the teachers just calmly, sometimes I'll even close my eyes and I'm sitting cross-legged. We're all sitting on the ground, by the way. No one's necessarily in chairs. Right. And ultimately the students are watching. They will see us being quiet. They don't need us to
Right.
So that's a really powerful book in terms of just teach. It's almost teaching you extrinsically how to be intrinsically motivated. Right. And my brain is slipping on this. The other book, and I may have to get back to you on this one. It's about raising children, and it's got this great chapter on on raising teenagers, because the biggest challenge that everyone has is raising teenagers. You can kind of get through the little kid years, the younger years with, you can navigate your way through that. But once the teenage hormones start kicking in, I'm sorry, but that's when I have to counsel parents on a consistent basis to say, you know what, this book taught me. It's we as parents need to be it's a roller coaster ride. Right? Our teenagers are going on a roller coaster ride. We need to be on a platform. We need to be on the platform, cheering them along, showing them that we're there. We're not going anywhere. We love them, but we're not getting on that roller coaster with them. Right. We're not the ones, emailing their teachers that that they didn't get the grade they deserve. We're not, we're there, but we're not on their journey. And that, for me, was such a profound takeaway from this book, which is and I always reference this chapter and send it to parents over and over again. So I'll just have to look back on my emails and get back to it. But raising teenagers is so important, and effectively raising teenagers in this day and age with all the distractions that they have. And again, the roller coaster metaphor is perfect. Yeah. It's exactly. And then parents are like, oh, and then they'll come back to me and they're all emotional about something. I'm like, stay on that platform. Yeah. They just need to know that you love them unconditionally. Yeah. And anyway, well, I can say this all right now. I'm in the wonder years of with having a kindergartner and third grader. So right. I'm in that smooth patch now. So maybe come back in 10 years and I'll be sweating with right. more wrinkles and stress, more gray hairs. Everybody always makes fun of the gray hairs that are popping out more and more. So those are the Paz created. So I'll go with those two. Cool. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to get you the name of that.
Yeah, great. Second question. If you could share or offer one thing here with someone, either a teacher or an administrator, stuck in the old paradigm of education, what would you share with them?
I would invite them to morning meeting, so that they could see with their own eyes what kids can do when they are not told what to do by adults. Mm-hmm. That's what I would do. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't tell them anything. Just say, just come to the morning meeting. Just come to the morning meeting. And invariably, they all leave. We've had traditional educators here. We've had all kinds of people who float through the morning meeting, and they're just like, they just leave with their eyes open. There's what? What drugs are you giving these kids? No. No, we're just giving them the drug of love, peace, and compassion, like empathy, all of it, and teaching them intentionally through modeling, careful modeling and planning how they can get there. Yeah. We're not telling them how to do it. We're modeling it for them. Yeah. Because the students are watching.
Right.
So,
yeah, it's beautiful. It's like you I asked a question which was kind of a very conventional question, but your answer is very evocative of the type of schooling that happens here, which is more the students are watching and very experiential. Yeah. Last but not least, what are you most excited about now?
What am I most excited about now? I am most excited about watching my kids go through the La Paz experience along with my wife, her and I together, just watching them experience what we've created. It's exciting because we see things. We get to see each level. So we get to see things that we're not so excited about. We're like, ooh, that wasn't that wasn't what we had in mind. But okay, all right. All right. They're like in school. And we get to see, things that are just dialed in to exactly what we had envisioned. Yeah. You realize that in search of perfection, you lose the good. And that's been a really important lesson for maybe a more type A individual such as myself. like just ease up a little bit. It's okay. It's okay if it's not perfect. It's not okay if it's perfectly aligned with the vision in general. Yeah. I get that consistent feedback when people tour the school. They're like, that's the feedback that says, okay, we're on the right path. So it's exciting to watch my kids go through this experience that we've created and just go on this ride with them, staying on the platform, of course.
Staying on the platform.
Yeah. That's what I'm most excited about.
I have to ask one last question because it just came to me and I think it's so relevant, and I imagine you have a take on this, but social media and cell phones and smartphones specifically, like what do you guys do about that here, if anything, or like what's the deal? I mean, I see kids everywhere with their head down in their phone, and I'm wondering like what your view is on that.
My view is it's part of this new world that we're learning about every day, and we don't need to tell kids how to behave on social media. We need to model how kids should behave. It doesn't matter if they're on social media. It doesn't matter if they're at family dinner or in morning meeting. If we can just be present with each other, which is a lot of those socio-emotional skills are based on. I think what's happening here in the 21st century is that these soft skills are transforming into the most valuable skills because by default, more and more people are turning to their screens. And we're teaching kids that the face-to-face interaction is what makes you feel good. Mm-hmm. We're not... It does, in all of Darwin's early works. Unfortunately, the whole survival of the fittest was pulled out of his early works, but that wasn't what he was getting at. If you really get into what he was talking about, he was so amazed and enthralled with the compassion and love that animals have for each other. And that's not pulled out of it because that's not sensational. Right. Sometimes compassion and love is, again, soft. It's a soft skill. Right. When it's actually the most important element. So in terms of social media, yeah, it's there. and our kids make mistakes on it daily.
Yeah.
And that's life. And we need to recognize that those are mistakes and move forward. And whether they have their virtual personality or their everyday real personality, we need to work on aligning those. So that's my kind of circuitous answer to your question.
Cool. Well, we've taken a lot of your time, Abel, and being here talking to you in this environment, I sensed from you, I certainly was feeling it, like this tremendous emotion of pride and this incredible warmth and love that you have for this place. And it's a special experience to be in that with you, to kind of go on this ride. You know, there's people listening to this have probably heard in the background. We have all kinds of, we're right in an office by the hallway, and there's kids and parents and teachers and administrators going back and forth. There's an energy here that's very uncommon in educational circles. And I would call it just, there's a lightness. There's just a real lightness. And wow, what a special thing to have talked to you in this situation.
I just want to thank you, Stephen, because like I said, I turned 40 yesterday, and this is like a really big, I don't know. It's like I needed this reflection. You guys came into my life exactly when I needed to just sit and reflect. Because everybody always says, "Oh, Abel, you should be so proud." I'm like, I don't have time to be proud, man. Like, okay, this is great. It's it's taking a team effort. Whether you're looking at Sarah, Brian, Kelly, David, Carrie, the 6 of us to start it. But every single turn, there's been a key player who's come in, at a crucial time to make this thing roll, to make this thing what it is.
Yeah.
So it's allowed me the opportunity to sit back and tell the story that I've wanted to tell for a long time, but haven't known how to share it. And your questions were just dialed in, and I don't know, the journey has been just incredible. Yeah. I got no words. So thank you for helping me walk through this journey. It's really been a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Oh, good. Me too, man. Yeah.
Awesome. No hay más palabras. No more to be said. Thank you.
That's it for this week's Ownstream Podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this amazing interview with Abel McClennen. Be sure to check out the show notes for this episode for links to everything mentioned, including the Paz School website, some additional media, including a picture of the school's founders, the beautiful Guanacaste tree on the grounds, the books he recommended, and the other resources we discussed. All of that can be found at ownstream.co/Abel McClennen. That's ownstream.co/ABELMCCLENNEN.
Also, please sign up for our weekly tip-off email at ownstream.co and just click the sign up button in the upper right-hand corner. This is where we share each Monday 3 cool things we've learned in the last week in the areas of lifestyle, business, and spirit. This could be an amazing quote, individual tip, or tool designed to bring you more freedom and power in your life. So definitely sign up for that again at ownstream.co and just click sign up.
Finally, as Teresa mentioned in our introduction, please consider leaving us a review on iTunes. We really need your help in expanding our reach, helping us to inspire more people and spread the amazing ideas discussed on this episode with Abel McClennen and others too. If it feels right to you, simply go to iTunes, search for the Ownstream Podcast, click ratings and reviews, then click that 5th star and leave us a brief comment on how this episode has inspired you. Thank you so much for considering that. We are very, very grateful. Also, we're on Twitter and Facebook at Ownstream and on Instagram at Own_stream. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Ownstream Podcast. To learn more and connect with us, please visit ownstream.co or follow us on Twitter at Ownstream and Instagram at own_stream.